Well, Mountain West fans, we are less than 10 days away from kickoff. And today, we're going to be going team by team, game by game, breaking down the season for every single one of the Mountain West Conference's teams. We're going to be looking at these programs. We're going to be previewing them. We're going to be looking at their overall records, a prediction for each of these, and we'll also be looking at how these teams are going to rack and stack against the rest of the Mountain West at the end of the season and who is going to be playing in the Mountain West Championship game. This is my third year doing this. My first year doing it, I was really good. 7 out of 12 teams, I was within one game, number overall under for that prediction. Last season, not so good. I was within 3 games for 9 of the teams, but only within 1 for 3 of the teams, Boise State, New Mexico, and Hawaii. So trying to get back to my winning ways this season, but I expect a great year out of the Mountain West. They need to have a great year this season. Last year, there was a lot of things that threw the Mountain West for a loop that really kind of ended up impacting my predictions. Injuries racked up. Utah State, Fresno State, major injuries to their quarterback positions for both of those programs. Quarterback changes at Boise State and San Diego State. New coaches not meeting expectations. Keeley there, Colorado State and Nevada. And then also teams surprising, Air Force and UNLV. Both of those programs doing very well last season. Better than what was projected of them coming into the season. So now we're going to look at the 2023 season, and the Mountain West teams need to make a statement. This year, the Mountain West Conference is now getting a chance to firmly establish itself as the top Group of 5 conference, a position I think that they've held for the last 5 years. However, that position has been taken away from them by the American Athletic Conference due to their marketing and due to the East Coast bias. But however, the American Athletic Conference is in a weak place right now. They lost 3 teams over to the Big 12 during expansion, and Mountain West has a chance to step up and say, we are the best team in the Group of 5. We are the conference, and that deserves to be getting that automatic Group of 5 bid slot to the college football playoff, where it's not really a Group of 5 bid slot, but the top 6 conference champions will get into the playoffs based on rankings overall. And so there will be at least one Group of 5 team as part of that. But the Mountain West needs to say, we are going to be that team going forward after this season in 2024. We need to be the conference that you're looking to as our champion, being the representative in that college football playoff. And it all starts by having a solid season here in 2023. The Mountain West needs to eclipse the American, but they also need to be worried about the Sun Belt here, because the Sun Belt is now getting a lot of that same hype that the American got. Remember, the American did not build itself. The media built that conference. Those teams were nothing before the media got a hold of them, before they increased their exposure, increased their recruiting, and built that conference up. Well, now that same hype is being turned to the Sun Belt. The Mountain West needs to do something to grab that and bring the spotlight back onto them, back to the West Coast this season, especially with the demise of the Pac-12. There are so many reasons that the Mountain West needs to be stepping up as the best conference of Group 5, the best remaining conference on the West Coast, making itself the most likely option for those Pac-12 teams to eventually try to join if they're unable to rebuild that conference, or potentially trying to create themselves as the prime conference that you want to add members from. Either way, that all starts with having a solid season here in 2023. I believe the Mountain West, to establish themselves this year, they need to at least get 2 teams ranked, and they need 3 teams with 10+ wins overall by the end of the season. That can include bowl wins, but they need to have at least 3. Last season, they went 3-7 in bowl season. Only Boise State, Fresno State, and Air Force getting wins. It was not a good year for them, and they need to establish their dominance. So it all starts first kickoff. We're going to start off with Air Force and go all the way through alphabetically through these teams. So if you're trying to skip ahead to find your program, to find the prediction for your program, you can fast forward based on alphabetically how long you think I'm going to be talking and figure out where your team is going to end up. But Air Force all the way up through Wyoming at the end here. And we're going to be making sure that we give you in-depth previews, predictions for all of these programs. Now, however, before we get into that, I want you right now to go into the comments and tell me what you think your team is going to do this season. Give me your prediction. We can compare notes at the end, but right now, what do you think your team is going to be doing? Overall record prediction, any other notes you want to put in there, and at the end of the video, you can look at what I said, I can look at what you said, and we can compare our notes. I want this to be a discussion as we develop our understanding of these teams and we build our expectations for this season. So, starting off with Air Force. Air Force, a team that last season did very well, went 10-3. They returned 5 offensive starters, 8 defensive starters. However, this is an Air Force team that is going to be hurting. Because like I said, 5 offensive starters, the members that are not there, that are part of those members not returning, are very, very impactful. Probably the team that I think will hurt the most out of players being lost. Air Force and Fresno State are going to be right up there as far as programs that are going to be in major rebuilds this year. Air Force, they are losing Hazik Daniels, but more impactful than that, they're losing Brad Roberts, who rushed for almost 2,000 yards last year, 1,728 yards rushing. They also lose their top 2 receivers. Not that that matters so much in Air Force's system, but their top receiver there had 400 yards and nobody else is even close to that, so they're losing that production. On top of that, you're also going to need to replace your leader in tackles for loss and your leader in sacks, and you're also going to need to replace your punt returner and your kick returner. The biggest issue I have with Air Force is that they've typically had a quarterback who's been somewhat in training step up, someone who either through injuries or just through playing time has had a chance to step in and have a role. This year, the quarterback's going to be taking over for them is Ben Britton, and in his season so far at Air Force, he's a senior this year, and his previous 3 years with Air Force, he has only had 2 completions for 111 yards, and he's only rushed 7 times for 40 yards overall. So the completion factor, not such a big deal with Air Force's offense, but the fact that he has barely been involved in the running game at all, barely been involved in the game, he is going to be a major wild card, and he's been there for 4 years. Why hasn't he gotten any action? I think this is an Air Force program that offensively is likely, the loss of their top running back, loss of their quarterback, to be taking a step back this season. You also have the fact that Air Force is being hurt by the takeout of the cut block rule. So you can't cut block anymore, and that was a big part of Air Force's system, making up for their smaller size. They are going to be helped by the fact that the clock rule has been changed. So on first downs, you no longer have a stoppage of the clock while we reset the downs. So Air Force's grind up the clock game control system is going to be even more impactful, and that might help cancel out the cut block rule a little bit. But both of those factors are going to be changes in college football that we aren't sure how they're going to impact Air Force, and it's an Air Force program that's going to be hurting. Now, having said that, I think there is a lot of hope here for the season because it is a pretty easy schedule overall. Air Force, as typical, of course, has Army and Navy, and they've gone out of their way this year to make sure that they schedule, as usual, FCS programs. Now, however, I do think that Air Force is upset this season because one program that was supposed to be an FCS program totally got the dupe on them and has moved up to the FBS. My understanding is that Air Force is totally irate, and they filed complaints with the Department of Defense. We're going to see if that can go through Congress here soon. Joking aside, they do have one FCS program on their schedule, and then Sam Houston, which was going to be an FCS program, has moved up to Conference USA, so that is now an FBS level opponent. So a little bit increase in strength of schedule, but still overall, non-conference is looking pretty good for Air Force here. So let's go game by game and look at what we think they're going to do. So starting off with Robert Morris, I think that's a win. FCS program, Air Force, option offense should be fine. Sam Houston, a FBS program now, but still a weaker one. It's down in Texas, but I think Air Force should be fine there. Another win for them. Now, they go to Utah State. This is a game I could see going either way. Again, I think this is going to be a weaker program, and we're going to talk about Utah State later, but I think that Utah State is going to be an improved program, and those Utah State Air Force games are typically close anyway. Last season, Air Force actually losing to a weaker Utah State, 27-34, and this year, it's reversed. Utah State, I think, is going to be stronger. Air Force is going to be weaker. I think that Utah State gets that win. So that's their first loss, opening up 2-1. Then I think they lose to San Jose State, who I think is also going to be good. Of course, they have Sherry Cordero, who's going to be the best quarterback returning in the Mountain West this season. So I think they lose to San Jose State. I think they can get a win against San Diego State. I think then they can go on a streak here. I think they get wins against Wyoming, Navy, Colorado State, Army, Hawaii, and UNLV. Navy and Army, of course, always going to be toss-ups, always going to be close, but both those programs were bad last season and don't look like they're going to improve too much this year. So I think the Air Force will be able to make sure they can maintain control of the Commanders-in-Chief's trophy, and will be able to at least get that. That's their biggest goal. But there's going to be a Mountain West Championship on the line here potentially for Air Force. I mean, they're going to be in the conversation for that, especially with the new Mountain West system where there's no more divisions. It's pod, so it's just straight up the top 2 teams. Air Force has been right up there with Boise State as the top 2 teams consistently. not every year, but they've been in that battle to be one of those top 2 teams here in the last 5 years. And Air Force looks like a chance this season to be one of those top 2 programs. So finishing off the year, they then have to face Boise State. So we've said that they've gone right now on a 7-game winning streak. I mean, this could be a top 25 program right now, depending on how those losses to Utah State and San Jose State went, at least an AP potentially top 25 program. You're looking at a program that is 9-2 overall and attempting to get to 10-2 and solidify themselves in the Mountain West Championship game, or at least give themselves a good footing for that Mountain West Championship game, depending on what other teams do in the season. What happens Boise State versus Air Force? Well, I think that this is a much better Boise State team, and this is a much worse Air Force team. Last season, Boise State able to get the win in a very close game versus Air Force. But I think that Boise State, and of course, I mean, it's always going to be tough, but the game is at Boise. Boise State typically has done a little bit better at home, and recent history, even though Air Force has had Boise State's number called in the rivalry of recent years, in at least the last few seasons, Boise State has had that game, except for, of course, in 2021 when they lost it at home for Boise State. But recently here, going all the way back to 2018, Boise State has been able to lock up their wins in that rivalry and has somewhat figured out the triple option. I think Boise State will be able to get that win. So you're looking at an Air Force team that even though they're depleted, even though that they're hurting, I still think finishes this season 9-3 and puts their foot forward to be a contender for the Mountain West Championship game. All right, and I should have said this at the beginning, but these individual games, I'm not staking my reputation on the fact that Air Force is going to, lose to Utah State and they're going to beat Wyoming. I'm not saying they're going to win each and every single game that I'm predicting. What I'm predicting overall is an overall record prediction. Somehow they're going to get to that number. There's going to be some games they should win that they'll lose. There'll be some games that I predict that they'll lose that they'll win. And overall, they're going to get to 9-3. That is my predicted record for Air Force. Whether it works out perfectly, crystal ball is really hard to tell, but I think that 9-3 is how they get there. Whether it's the way I just predicted or somewhere else, I think 9-3 is the level you're looking at, and I'm just kind of showing my work in a mathematical equation sense for how I got this team to 9-3 overall. All right, moving on to Boise State. Now, for Boise State, this is going to be a very, very brief discussion because I did a in-depth preview with Master Football where I went through and previewed every single opponent on Boise State's roster in-depth, much more in-depth than we're going through each of these opponents today for the Mountain West teams. You need to go over and watch that video. There's a ton of other great information, and I am going to give you my record prediction for Boise State so that this video is complete. But if you want an in-depth look at the Boise State roster and how Boise State schedule and how I got to that number, you need to go back and watch that video. Link will be in the description. For Boise State, I'm projecting 10-2, and we're going to move on from there. All right, so looking next at Colorado State. Colorado State, a program that brought over Nevada's head coach, Jay Norvell, last season. One of the best coaches in the Mountain West. Did a great job with Nevada with limited resources, what he was able to do there. Great recruiter. Brought over Clay Millen, the highest ranked recruit ever in Nevada school history, over to Colorado State. Stole a bunch of other players from Nevada, and really looked like he was going to have a good year last season, and it didn't pan out. 3-9 overall. However, 7 players back on offense, 8 players back on defense. They returned their top running back, which Mountain West is depleted as far as returning running backs go. Only 3 programs actually return their top running backs: San Jose State, Colorado State, and Boise State. That's it. The rest of them are all limping along with backups or guys that have transferred in. So this is going to be a very interesting, new-looking running back class for the Mountain West. Maybe a little bit weaker in the running back game than they have been in years past. But Colorado State, they return their top running back there in Avery Morrow. They also returned Clay Millen, who had a true freshman season last year. Was not great. Under 2,000 yards passing, 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, but I expect him to be improved this year after a full offseason working with this team. It is a Colorado State program that is going to be losing some players, but they return their top 2 receivers, and I think that this is a program that can take a major step forward. They're pouring millions of dollars into their program. Colorado State is one of those programs in the Mountain West that's been perennially one of the bottom tier, bottom of the barrel programs, but they want to be in the elite level, not just Mountain West, they want to be Power 5. This is a program with Power 5 aspirations. The boosters are putting that money in. They have great facilities, and it just doesn't pan out. I think they have the coach to get them there now. I think they are starting their way towards recruiting to that now, and I think in the next couple of years, maybe 3 years, Colorado State is going to be a team that is going to be contending for the top of Mountain West. I don't think that's going to be this year, but 3-9 last year, I think they can improve upon that. Let's look at their schedule. All right, so they open up with Washington State. That's a tough one, going to be a loss. Moving on then to Colorado. In years past, that might have been a win for them, but of course, you got the Deion Sanders fever down there. I think that probably this Colorado State team is going to lose that game versus Deion Sanders. If they manage to pull off a win, there may be some major questions for Deion Sanders here in his first year with Colorado that may change the course of that program. But I think Colorado will win that game. So it's a tough opening, 0-2. Now they have to play Middle Tennessee, which is not an easy out-of-conference game like it usually would be, a team from Conference USA. They are a team that beat San Diego State last year in the bowl game, and it was a decent San Diego State team. So, Middle Tennessee, not a team that you can mess around with. I think Colorado State can get the win, but it is going to be close. That is a game that could go either way. And based on what you're going to see my prediction at the end of the year, that could be a major, major win or loss for Colorado State based on their end-of-year goals. Then they play Utah Tech. FCS opponent should be able to beat them. Utah State, I think it's going to be a loss. Again, I think it's going to be an improved Utah State team. We'll talk about that when we get to them. Boise State, I think it's going to be a loss. UNLV, I think they can win against that, even though UNLV is on the rise. I think that this Colorado State team, an improved one with a much better quarterback, much better passing game. Jay Norvell, like I said, one of the best minds in the Mountain West. I think they can beat UNLV. Lost to Air Force, win versus Wyoming, a Wyoming team that's hurting right now because he just lost their top running back returning from last season. So again, that is going to be an issue we'll talk about when we get to Wyoming, but I think they can beat Wyoming. Lost to San Diego State, win against Nevada, win against Hawaii to end the season, assuming that they can beat Middle Tennessee, end the season 6-6, or maybe get a win somewhere else where I predicted a loss and lose somewhere else. I think that this is a program that can get back to bowl season. They have not been bowl eligible in a very long time, but I think that this is a program that can get there, and I think this is a program you're going to see on the rise. Starts by doubling their win record from last season. All right, next up, we're looking at Fresno State. Fresno State is a program that is one of those teams that lost a lot of players from last year. Obviously losing Jake Haener, also lost their number one running back in Jordan Mims. This is a major rebuild team for Fresno State. They are also, however, bringing in some good transfers. So they lose players, but they're bringing in some good players. And at the end of the day, they have another great coach in Jeff Tedford. I said Jay Norvell is one of the best. Jeff Tedford probably is the best coach in the Mountain West. In the last 4 seasons, he only has one where he lost less than 10 wins. That was in 2019, the season that he quit due to health reasons. So there was other things going on that year. Other than that, though, he has had his team competing for a Mountain West Championship game every single season and going for 10 or more wins every single year, including last season when they got to 10-4. Now, they only returned 4 starters on offense, and they only returned 7 starters on defense. It is going to be especially tough on the offense. The schedule is a little forgiving, and that could help in their favor. And they do bring in some good transfers. They bring in Mikey Keeney. I think I'm pronouncing his name right, but Mikey Keeney from UCF, a quarterback who took over from Dylan Gabriel once he got hurt in that 2021 season. And I thought he showed some good stuff there, some good promise. Didn't end up working out for him there at UCF, but the season is going to hang on Keeney. Can Keeney show the promise that he was recruited for at UCF here at Fresno State? Can he be, he's not going to be the next Jake Haener, but can he be close? That is all going to ride. I think that Fresno State, you're looking at a program that could easily be 7-5 or 10-2, and it's all going to depend on whether or not Keeney lives up to expectations. As far as running back game, that's going to be tough to replace there in Mims, but you've got Malik Sherrod, who is returning, and then you've got a transfer from Cal in Damian Moore. You also have Devon Rivers, the brother of Ronnie Rivers, so there may possibly some family talent trickled down there as well. You got several transfer wide receivers coming in. So I think this is a Fresno State team that's going to be on the rebuild, but that doesn't mean they can't have a good year. Let's look at the schedule prediction overall. They open up versus Purdue. Last year's Fresno State team could have beat Purdue. This year's Fresno State team opening up new offense or new offensive players. I think that's a loss to open up the year. But then they move into Eastern Washington. That should be a win. They then play Arizona State, a Pac-12 team that went 3-9 last year. I think that this is a Fresno State team that has high expectations, that wants to succeed, wants to prove their Power 5 level program that can replace the likes of Arizona State potentially in a rebuilt Pac-12. So I think Fresno State is capable of getting that win. It's going to be on the road. It's going to be tough, but I think they can go in and get that win against Arizona State. Win versus Kent State, win versus Nevada, win versus Wyoming. So this is a program that could be opening up the season 5-1, lost to Purdue, on the cusp potentially of getting ranked. Then they're going to go play Utah State. It's at Utah State. They're just coming off a game versus Wyoming, who's going to be tough to beat defensively. They're going to have to play their best game versus then beat them offensively versus the tough Wyoming defense. So Utah State is a program that, I don't stake the record predictions on specific games overall. It's an overall projection that I'm actually staking myself on versus individual games. But I think that Utah State is a game that Fresno State could lose. I think they're going to lose a game along the way that they should win. I don't think that this is a program that cruises to 7-1 conference overall. I think this is a program that loses at least one Mountain West Conference game that they should win. Utah State seems to have that potential with what they're bringing back this year. For a Mountain West champion in 2021, just kind of fell off the cliff last season. But I think that this could be a game that they lose. So potentially loss there to Utah State, win versus UNLV, loss to Boise State, battle the milk can. I think goes to Boise this year. This is a Boise State team that has never lost in the regular season, the Battle of the Milk Can, under Andy Avalos when he was a player or a coach for Boise State. So I think that this is a game where Boise State has the laser focus. They're a much better Boise State team than this Fresno State team, which is on the rebuild. They get that win. Then I think they can win versus San Jose State, New Mexico, and San Diego State to close out the year. Now, like I said, especially those three games, of all the games I've mentioned so far, besides maybe the Utah State game, those three games, San Jose State, New Mexico, which is a trap game, and San Diego State, because at San Jose State, home versus New Mexico, and at San Diego State, with maybe a game you overlook in New Mexico, who's going to be better this year, and we'll talk about why later, those three games could all potentially, or two out of those three could potentially end up being losses for Fresno State, which would drastically change the prediction overall. I'm going to say Fresno State pulls out the win. Jeff Tedford works his magic and finds a way to put the Bulldogs in a running for the Mountain West Championship with a 9-3 record overall. However, like I said, this could just as easy, almost 50-50, end up being a 7-5 season overall for, or 6-6 potentially for Fresno State if they are not careful. But I think they can eke it out. I think they can get to 9-3, 3 wins to end the season and put themselves in the Mountain West Championship game. All right. Looking at next, it's Hawaii, and we're going to look at 3 programs here that are probably not going to do very well, and that should not come as a major surprise to their fan bases here. But starting off with Hawaii, Rainbow Warriors program has really not much to say here. They return their top quarterback, they lose their top running back. Their top quarterback really didn't do a ton last year, almost as many interceptions as he had touchdowns. 5 returning stars on offense, 9 returning stars on defense. It's a Hawaii program that's just been absolutely taking to the shed since that 2019 season where they were able to rack up a 10-5 record overall, which was a great year for them. And everyone's like, all right, Hawaii's back, and then they weren't. So last season, 3-10. Season before that, 6-7. Year before that, 5-4. And then, of course, 10-5 in 2019. This is a program that's hurting. It's a program that's struggling. They have a tough non-conference schedule. I don't see them getting a ton of wins this season. We'll go through the record overall. They brought in their former quarterback from early in the 2000s, 2000, 2004, Timmy Chang, to run this program to try and rebuild after everything that rocked them after the loss of their last coach. And he's kind of their Kellen Moore. He's their school passing record. He's a hero for this program. Kind of bring in a hometown warrior to come in and maybe rebuild this program. That's the thought process. We'll see if it works out. Maybe he can start with recruiting and bring it back from there. But he started off 3-10 last year. This season with a Mountain West Conference that the bottom level teams, besides Hawaii, I think are on the rise. And so it's going to be tougher to eke out some of those gimme wins or 50-50 wins versus the bottom of the barrels, because I think that Hawaii now stands alone as the worst team in the Mountain West this year. I think they lose to Vanderbilt to start the season, lose to Stanford, win versus Albany, lose to Oregon. I think they can get a win versus New Mexico State, but again, it's a think. That could be a loss for them as well. I lost to UNLV, lost to San Diego State, lost to New Mexico, lost to San Jose State, lost to Nevada, lost to Air Force, lost to Wyoming, lost to Colorado State. This is a team, they are playing 13 games because of the Hawaii exemption that allows them to play a 13th game because of travel distance. Any program that plays Hawaii also gets to add additional games to their schedule if they want to. Hawaii taking advantage of that because I don't think they see themselves going bowling, so this is their way of adding that additional game that a bowl game would be to their schedule. this is a program I see going 2-11. Maybe you could see them eking out 4 wins somewhere, getting some surprise 50-50s. So 4 wins is reachable, but it's probably the ceiling for this program. I think it's going to be another rough year for the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. All right, looking at Nevada, again, another one of those bottom-of-the-barrel teams, and Nevada's kind of one of those programs that goes either way. They're either super, super competitive or they're super, super terrible. And after the loss at Jay Norvell, they've been back to super, super terrible. Last season going 2-10 after consecutive years of really strong performances for them, multiple 8-win seasons, that kind of thing. But last year, back to 2-10, returned 6 stars on offense, 6 stars on defense. Nevada brings over Colorado starting quarterback, not Colorado State, but Colorado starting quarterback, Brendan Lewis, former starter for the Colorado Bison. Part of that big explosion of players after Deion Sanders took over. But he has potential here. He's a Power 5 guy, at least he was. So he was recruited to that level. Again, it's to Colorado, which is kind of the bottom of the barrel of the Power 5, but he has some potential. He could potentially turn this program around. I am going to just say right off the bat, I'm not expecting great things out of Nevada here. 2-10 is what they went last season. It's going to be tough to do much better than that this year, but this is a guy who could potentially get Nevada back on track to being a strong program again for the Mountain West. However, the loss of their running back, Tua, who was really the one redeeming factor of this team last season, almost 1,000 yards rushing, and their strategy was pretty much to give him the ball as much as possible. He is now gone. Over 217 carries last season. He also put up over 200 yards gained receiving. So he was a major threat, 293 yards receiving as well. So he was a major threat for them offensively, and he's gone. It's going to be tough to rebuild from that. It's a pretty tough non-conference schedule. They play USC, which I think is a guaranteed loss. Idaho is not easy this year. An FCS program that looks like they could win their conference and also be one of the top 10 programs in the FCS. They're in a lot of those top 10 rankings, the top 25 rankings. I think that's a loss for Nevada to open up the year. So I think they lose that game. Kansas, bomb barrel Big 12 team, but they're on the ride back. And, they took over. Buffalo's coach came over to coach for them, and they played really, really well last year. They're one of those kind of exciting surprise teams. So Kansas is a program that you can't count as a guaranteed win anymore, and I think that could be a loss for Nevada. So they could be opening up 0-3. I think they can win versus Texas State. It's a program that went 4-8 last year, but Nevada went 2-10. So that could be a loss, but I think it's going to be a win for them. Then I think it's mostly losses here. Fresno State, UNLV, San Diego State, all losses. New Mexico, I could see being a win for them, but again, this is a New Mexico program that is going to be much better than years past. So that could be a loss, but I'm projecting a win. Win versus Hawaii, and then loss to Utah State, loss to Colorado State, loss to Wyoming, 3-4 overall. Maybe they have the possibility to draw up to a 5-7 type of record, especially if the Colorado quarterback works out. Maybe bowl eligibility is in their grasp. I think it's probably a little bit too far for this Nevada team that continues to be on the rebuild. All right, moving on to discussing New Mexico, a team that I'm actually very excited to talk about. I know they're a bottom-of-the-barrel program here for the Mountain West, but they have a quarterback coming in, which is the best get they have ever gotten. New Mexico is bringing over Dylan Hopkins, transfer from UAB. This is probably, I'm not, an expert on New Mexico player history, so someone's probably going to go in the comments and be like, 97 years ago, we had this player who, won a Heisman or something. I don't know. But there's probably better players in New Mexico history if I went back in the record. But at least in my living memory, I think this is the best player I've ever seen come to New Mexico. Dylan Hopkins, transferred from UAB, followed his offensive coordinator, who is now the offensive coordinator for New Mexico. He was the interim head coach at UAB. They decided not to continue him as the actual head coach, and he transfers over here to New Mexico to be offensive coordinator. So you bring over offensive coordinator from UAB, you bring over the quarterback from UAB. This quarterback, 4,000 plus yards passing in his 3 seasons at UAB. In 2021, over 2,000 yards passing. In 2022, almost 2,000 yards passing again. 28 touchdowns between those 2 seasons. Now, for reference overall, this New Mexico last season had 1,259 yards passing altogether between their 3 quarterbacks that went out there and threw the ball around, and not a single one of them had more than 900 yards passing on their own. Dylan Hopkins by himself had 1,913 yards passing, 10 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. So not a great season by quarterback levels, but for New Mexico, this is unheard of to get a quarterback of this level come to this program. He's a mediocre, upper mediocre level quarterback overall, but for New Mexico, he's amazing. He's played in 3 bowl games, won 2 of them, including versus BYU in 2021. He's been part of 3 winning seasons in his time at UAB. All of these things are completely foreign to New Mexico. They went 2-5 in 2020, 2-10 in 2019, 3-9 in 2018, 3-9 in 2021, and 2-10 last season. So this is a New Mexico program that is not used to even sniffing bowl eligibility. And here you bring over a quarterback who has over 4,000 yards passing. He has multiple winning seasons. He's been to bowl games. He's going to have experience that none of these players on the roster have. And maybe he's someone you can build a season around, a special season around for New Mexico here. The issue is that he has nobody around him. You know, he has no wide receiver with over 350 yards passing last year, no offensive line. Their top returning running back had only 326 yards. And he himself is not a runner. He's capable of doing some things with his legs and being maneuverable, but he's not, you know, a dual threat quarterback. And then they only have 2 returning starters on defense. So you bring in a great quarterback who is probably one of the best ones you've ever had in program history, but at the same time, there's nobody left on the roster. So what is the ceiling here for New Mexico? Well, potentially, this could be a New Mexico team, depending on what happens with Dylan Hopkins, this could be a New Mexico team that goes for bowl eligibility. However, their non-conference schedule is tough. They open up versus Texas A&M. That's definitely going to be a loss, and it's probably going to deplete them a little bit because that's going to be a tough fight. They get Tennessee Tech, which they should be able to win, New Mexico State, and Massachusetts. So I said their non-conference is tough, but I meant their opening game is tough. Those 3 non-conference games, though, Tennessee Tech, New Mexico State, and UMass, they should be able to win all 3 of those. So they could start off the year 3-1 with only needing 3 more wins to get to bowl eligibility. However, they then play Wyoming, which I think is going to be a loss, especially going up against Wyoming's defense. San Jose State, strong program for the Mountain West, should be a loss. I think they can win versus Hawaii. And I think they could win versus Nevada. I'm just not sure what this program has so many unknowns that right now I'm calling the win for Nevada, but I could honestly see that game going in New Mexico's favor. Right now I'm going to call it a loss, but I think this could be a win for New Mexico for sure. They play UNLV, Boise State, Fresno State, and Utah State. I'm calling losses on every single one of those games, but I could see them winning versus Nevada. So they've already got the win versus Hawaii, and their 3 non-conference wins. That's 4. Then I could see them winning versus Nevada to get to 5, and I could easily see them winning versus UNLV or knocking off a team that they shouldn't win against, like a Utah State or Fresno State, in a trap game. Like I said, there's a trap game there for Fresno State, winning one of those games and getting to 6-6 overall. So I'm saying 4-8, but I really do think that this could be a bowl eligible team if Dylan Hopkins and this new offensive system can pan out for New Mexico. So of all the programs in the Mountain West, as far as the bottom tier programs in the Mountain West, New Mexico is the one I'm most excited about. I cannot wait to see what they do this year, and I'm really excited for when they play Boise State to see what this New Mexico team looks like. So San Diego State, next on our list, and we're getting really close here to being done. San Diego State, this is a program that, again, is also going to be hurting. Some people are projecting them to be 3rd in the Mountain West overall, but I think that is misguided. This is a program that went 7-6 last year. They returned 6 stars on offense, 6 stars on defense. They lose their top running back. They have a safety at quarterback, 0 rushers over 450 yards last year. They lose their top 2 wide receivers. They lose their top 3 tacklers on defense. That's majorly impactful. 85 tackles, 61 tackles, and 60 tackles all gone. And between those numbers, 17 sacks are also missing from those top 3 tacklers as well, and also multiple tackles for loss. So this is going to be defense that is going to be struggling to replace some players, and offensively did nothing last season. Braxton Burmeister not working out for them. Maiden comes over. He comes and saves his program late, is able to do some things to get them to bowl eligibility, but This is a program that has a safety at quarterback. There's a reason that he was at safety and not at quarterback. So who knows what his second year is going to look like, if he's going to be able to maintain those strong numbers from last year when he went 2,030 yards passing and also put up 231 yards rushing. But who knows what his performance is going to be like this year, because he doesn't have that consistency. He hasn't had to do this year in and year out, and he's losing weapons in the offense, receiving-wise, and there's nobody backing him up in the run game. This is San Diego State team that I think is right now riding on the hype of the whole jump for the Power 5 when they're really not worthy of that. In their last 5 seasons, they've had 3 where they barely scraped to a winning record or didn't manage to scrape a winning record like in 2020. Previous to that, they had 3 solid seasons, but when you look at those 3 solid seasons for them, those were all on the backs of Rashard Penny and Donald Pumphrey. Those 2 players alone got them to those solid 3 10-plus winning seasons. They locked into those players. That is not program success overall. They did not have strong teams overall, and that they have no winning legacy or tradition at these schools. This is a San Diego State team that if you take away those 3 seasons, which were all on the backs of 2 players, and when those 2 players were gone, they returned to losing again, 7-6 in 2018. If you take away those 3 seasons, then they only have 2 seasons where they truly were able to put together a team effort to win in 2019 and 2021, when they went 10-3, and 2021 when they surprised everybody by going 12-2, which was just a crazy year. We don't have any idea how they did that. But other than that, this is a San Diego State team that is consistently inconsistent and usually is ending up in the mid-level programs in the Mountain West. I think this is going to be a tough year for them with all the issues I noted offensively and defensively. They also have a very tough schedule. Looking at their schedule, they open up versus Ohio, MAC champion last season, a strong team versus San Diego State team that's rebuilding. I think they lose that game. Idaho State, they should win, but then UCLA and Oregon State, 2 tough Power 5 programs. They lose both of those games. Then they have to face Boise State. Boise State, the toughest team they're going to have to face in the Mountain West, and they just came off of facing 2 top-level Power 5 programs. I think they lose that game to Boise State. Then they face Air Force. I think they lose that game as well. And it's just, I mean, that's probably the toughest opening stretch of any team in the Mountain West for sure. And I'd have to look through other programs in the Group of 5, but that's got to be one of the toughest opening schedules in the Group of 5. You open up with a conference champion, 2 Power 5s, and then Boise State and Air Force, which are being projected to be the top 2 programs in the conference by multiple media sources. That is a tough opening stretch. Things get a little bit easier with Hawaii and Nevada. Both those should be wins. Utah State is a game that I'm going to call a loss for. I could see San Diego State standing strong and winning that game, but I think that's going to be a loss. Colorado State, I think, should be a win for them. But then San Jose State and Fresno State, both those programs should be strong down the stretch, and especially San Jose State. I think they lose both of those. Overall, for the season, 4-8 projected for San Diego State. One of their worst seasons in recent memory, but not out of character with a program that is consistently mediocre for football in the Mountain West. All right, so now we're moving on to our last 4 teams, looking at San Jose State. San Jose State, a program that returns the top quarterback in the Mountain West. In Cordero, the former quarterback at Hawaii. He's a dual threat guy. Cordero put up over 3,000 yards passing last season, 23 touchdowns. Also had 568 yards gained, though not net because you work in sack yardage, and it came up to be about 265 yards. But he rushed for 568 yards before you remove the sack numbers. They only returned 5 defenders, but they returned 3 out of their top 5 tacklers. So, a lot of depth to replace defensively, but you are returning your solid top 3 out of your top 5 solid guys. Wide receiver wise, they're going to have to replace 3 out of their top 4 receivers, so that's definitely going to hurt the passing game, maybe make it a little bit less potent this season, but they are one of those 3 teams in Mountain West to return their running back, so I think this is a San Jose State team that returns their top running back and their top quarterback, will put them on a strong footing. Are they going to be a team that competes for the Mountain West? I think they could be. They open up the season versus USC. I think that'll be a loss. I think right now it's being called like 30-point spread in that game, and I think that they can do better than that. I'm not going to call it a win, but I think they can maybe keep it within like 3 touchdowns. But then they go to Oregon State. I think that's going to be a loss as well, unfortunately. And they're very close to each other because they open up in week 0 versus USC, and then they open up on Sunday versus Oregon State in week 1. So it's 2 tough games, very close together, very little time to prepare. And then they have to play Cal Poly, which should be a win. Then Toledo, at Toledo, team that came in second in the MAC last season and is a strong team, beat my other program, Liberty, in bowl season. And I think that could be a loss too. I think San Jose State could win that game, but I think right now I'm going to be projecting a loss based on the fact that San Jose State is going to be having to replace a lot of stars on the passing game, and I think that is going to maybe inhibit their offensive performance a little bit. However, like I said, I think this is going to be a strong program. They play Air Force. I think they can beat a weakened Air Force. They play Boise State. You'll have to watch my preview to really kind of delve into what I'm calling for this game for my Boise State preview. But Boise State has a tough opening schedule. Not as tough as San Diego State, but still a tough opening schedule. And San Jose State is right at the end of that tough opening schedule before they get a bye week. And I wish they had a bye week before they played San Jose State. I think based on the teams Boise State is playing beforehand, San Jose State could get the win versus them. It's going to be a tough game either way. I think this is going to be one of the best San Jose State teams Boise State's faced in a long time. So I think I'm calling a win for San Jose State versus Boise State. And then win versus New Mexico State, win versus Utah State, win versus Hawaii. I think Fresno State, that's a rivalry game. It's always close. Jeff Tedford, Mountain West Conference in his sights. I think he gets the win. But again, that's a game that San Jose State probably should win, but I think is going to lose because of the superior coaching and hopefully the improvements from Keeney throughout the end of that season, which I am projecting. But San Jose State could win that game. I'm going to say a loss here. And then a win versus San Diego State. Now, this at the end here versus UNLV, remember when I say that I'm projecting a record, not necessarily every single game? I have them losing to UNLV. I think they'll win the game versus UNLV, but I don't see this being a program that's going to cruise all the way through 7-1 in the Mountain West. I think somewhere along the line, whether it's Air Force, Utah State, San Diego State, one of those games they're going to end up losing. But the way that I've worked it out when I've gone through these predictions and what I've given those other schools for their record predictions, I'm not calling a loss in one of those games. So I think right now I'm calling a loss to UNLV. I think they'll win that game, but at some point, one of the other 8 conference games or one of the other 7 conference games after they beat Boise State, they will lose a game that they probably shouldn't, but they will. Maybe that's the game versus Fresno State. Sorry, I'm already calling loss versus Fresno State, but somebody else along the line, maybe they'll lose to Boise State. They will lose another game and end up 6-2 overall in the conference is what I'm projecting. So I'm calling a loss versus UNLV. Do not crucify me in the comments. I think they're better than UNLV. I think they can beat UNLV, and I do actually think they will beat UNLV. But they're going to lose to somebody else based on these mathematics that I'm putting up here to get to 8-4, 6-2 in the conference. And so I've penciled it in for UNLV. It could just as easily be anybody else in this roster. It probably will end up being Boise State. But like I said, projecting a win versus Boise State, loss versus UNLV to finish up the season 8-4 overall. But this could easily be a team that is 9-3. Very, very easily could be a program that is 9-3 and right there in competition for the Mountain West Championship game. All right, so UNLV, a program which I've just mentioned a couple of times in this last section. UNLV, a program that is on the rise. You know, they are pouring money in their program. They are trying to improve. This is not so long ago that they didn't win a game in 2020, went 2-10 in 2021, but last year almost got to bowl eligibility. I mean, you look at a couple of games that could have gone one way or the other. I mean, they almost beat California, lost that game by 6 points, and then ended up going 5-7. This could have been a bowl-eligible team last year. They were very, very close. I think this is a team that's able to maybe make that step towards that this season. I really like their quarterback, Doug Brumfield. He's got KJ Jefferson vibes for me. You know, he can pass the ball, 1,898 yards passing, 10 touchdowns, 5 interceptions last season. He can run the ball, 261 yards rushing, 6 touchdowns. He's 6'5". He's a big guy. He moves well in open space. They are improving well. They're recruiting well, and it's a pretty easy schedule. So, UNLV, a program that I love to hate on because they have Power 5 aspirations, and they're not a Power 5 program. Vegas will never support a collegiate program. It's not designed for that. It's not a college-focused town. No matter how good UNLV gets, they will never draw in the viewership numbers of, say, a Boise State. But that is conference realignment talk. This is conference actual schedule football talk, and I think UNLV is going to be good this year. I like them for the talent that they return. 6 stars on offense, 7 stars on defense, and they've done a good job of rebuilding here. They lose a 1,000-yard back, but again, they've got Brumfield, who is a little bit of a force in the running game there, and I think they'll rebuild well, and it is a pretty easy schedule. They open up versus Bryant. FCS program should get the win. They then lose to Michigan, but they then get Vanderbilt. They are playing Vanderbilt at home in Vegas. I think Vanderbilt's a Power 5 program that isn't Power 5. Most Group of 5s, when they play Vanderbilt, beat Vanderbilt, and I think UNLV, program on the rise, can beat them. So open up season 2-1. They then play at UTEP. UTEP could be a win for UNLV, but UTEP's also a program that is building and developing. They beat Boise State last year for reasons that they wouldn't have beaten them later in the year. We fired offense coordinator and a quarterback after that game, but they did beat Boise State, and they are improving in a program that shows that looks like they might be one of the stronger programs in American Athletic Conference this year. So I think that they'll lose to UTEP, but I think they'll beat Hawaii, beat Nevada. Colorado State could go either way. I think I already said that already, but I'm going to call a loss for now because I think that Colorado State under Jay Norvell is going to be doing some great things, but that could go either way. I'm calling a loss for now. Fresno State loss, win versus New Mexico, win versus Wyoming, loss to Air Force, probably going to be close. And then San Jose State, again, I just had a whole conversation explaining what happens and why I think that they're probably not going to lose that game. But right now, I have them penciled in for a win to get to 7-5. I think this is probably, honestly, more of a 6-6 program than a 7-5. I have a 7-5 penciled in because I'm calling a win versus San Jose State. Like I just explained, if you fast-forwarded all of that to get to this point, I'm calling win versus San Jose State because I need San Jose State to lose a game to get to 6-2 in the conference for my overall record prediction. And so I'm penciling in UNLV as that loss. I don't honestly think that they will beat San Jose State, but who knows? The last few games, besides last year's game, have been very close between San Jose State and UNLV. In 2021, it was 20-27. In 2020, it was 17-34, a little bit wider margin there. But in 2019, it was 38-35, and they actually beat them. And then in 2018, it was 37-50, but they put up a lot of points. So this is a game that improving UNLV program at the end of the year, maybe, especially if bowl eligibility is not won yet, they could potentially pull out that win. I am saying 7-5, probably going to be 6-6 without that win versus San State at the end of the year. But right now, what I've given them, 7-5, which would be a huge win for this UNLV program as they continue to build their way up from the bottom to at least the mid-level of the Mountain West. All right, 2 more programs here, Utah State, Wyoming, and then wrap up. All right, so looking at Utah State is a program that struggled last year. 2021 Mountain West champions. They're returning as Mountain West champions. They struggle hard. They lose to their top 2 wide receivers. That hurts them. They then have multiple quarterback issues. I think at one point they were playing their 4th-string quarterback. Multiple injury issues racked that program. They lose to FCS program Weber State. It was not a good year for Utah State. Utah State's at a point right now where they need to prove which year was the fluke. They've not been very good in the last 3-4 years. Now, in 2018, they went 11-2, but they also had a quarterback that got drafted in the first round that year. In 2019, 7-6, 2020, 1-5. 2021, shock everybody, go 11-5. Next season, go 6-7 in the lost in FCS program. Which of those years was the fluke? And this is their year to prove what they are going forward. They're unfortunately facing a decently tough non-conference schedule. I do think that this is going to be a better Utah State team than we saw last year. I don't think it's going to be 2021 good, though. They finally figured out a starting quarterback. Looks like Cooper Lagos has cemented himself in that role. Bit of a surprise, I thought, stepping over Levi Williams, who had some, I'm not going to say Josh Allen potential, but he was one of those players that Craig Bull found, diamond in the rough guys, I think Levi Williams probably would have done better. He did look like he was playing better when he was with Craig Bohl with Wyoming. Maybe I think he wishes he'd stayed there. But he did not get the starting job over Cooper Lagos this year. Cooper Lagos is going to be more consistent this year after a full offseason to cement himself in that role. They do lose their top running back, an 1,100-yard back. They are losing some top receivers here. They have two out of their top 3 receivers are gone. 5 stars returning on offense, 4 stars returning on offense. They have players replaced everywhere. But I think it's a Utah State team that is going to be better. I think they would have been better last year if not for all the quarterback issues and if they'd been able to rebuild a little bit faster from their wide receiver problems. But the quarterback issues and the injuries really wrecked that program. And I think this is going to be a giant killer type program. I don't think this is a program that competes for the Mountain West Championship game per se, but I do think it's a program that throws some wrenches into some other teams' plans and knocks off some teams that are in competition for that. So let's go through the schedule. Open up versus Iowa, Big Ten team, probably going to be a loss based with this roster. Idaho State should be able to get that win. Air Force, loss. James Madison, JMU, a program that recently rose from the FCS to the FBS in the Sun Belt, have been great. This is a former national champion at the FCS level. They have made the transition flawlessly. I think they're going to be one of the best programs in the Sun Belt this year. I think that is a loss. That is a tough draw for Utah State. This is not an easy win. It probably maybe looked like, I don't know when this game was scheduled. Maybe it looked like an easy win when they scheduled it. It is no longer an easy win. I think that is going to be a loss for them. But they should be able to beat UConn, Colorado State, and I'm calling a win right now. One of those giant killer wins versus Fresno State. San Jose State is a tough program, especially with a quarterback who should have been able to develop a passing game by this point in the season. I think they lose that game, but I think they can win versus San Jose State and Nevada. I think they lose to Boise State, a strong, very, very good Boise State team this year, and then win versus a New Mexico program. They got to be careful, though, because it is going to be much better New Mexico program, but I think they can win to get to 7-5 overall. Pretty strong conference record overall. Losses to Air Force, Boise State, and San Jose State. Potentially they win one of those, or 2 of those that I've just mentioned, and get themselves in the conference competition, into the conversation for the Mountain West Championship game. It could happen. I'm not calling it to happen, but it could, and it's a Utah State team with potential, but I think they are probably going to show that 6-7 middle of the pack record is probably more evident where the program is right now than that surprise shock all 11-3 season that they put together. All right, last one to look at, Wyoming Cowboys, team that went 7-6 last year, returned 5 stars on offense, 10 stars on defense. I believe they returned the most stars on defense of any program in the Mountain West. They are looking to be one of the best defenses in the Mountain West. Unfortunately for them, they really don't have much on offense right now. They lose both of their top running backs from last season. Titus Swen left the program. He was dismissed, but I think he was wanting to head out anyway. He was dismissed at the end of the year, was not happy with the way that the end of the season was going, and there were some words said in practice, and he ended up on his way out. So Titus Swen lost. Then you also, however, had Darian McNeely, who you thought was going to step up and have a big role, out with a season-ending injury suffered in fall camp, right at the beginning of fall camp. Devastating blow for Wyoming. Now, the good news is that they have a pretty deep running back room, and they should be able to rebuild, but it is not going to be as deep as it was with the loss of 2 backs like that. Craig Bohl is probably one of the trickiest coaches in the Mountain West. What he is able to do with nothing. Laramie, Wyoming is not a place that is easy to recruit with. The diamonds and rough type players that he is able to develop, that he's able to pull to that program, that he's able to find on the recruiting trail that nobody else is looking at, he does that better than anybody else. So there could be a Josh Allen type player on this roster that we have no idea about. It's probably not Andrew Peasley, the former Utah State quarterback. It's probably not him. But there could be somebody else that steps up and completely changes the course of this Wyoming program for this season. I don't think that player is there. Again, we don't know. But based on all evidence, it doesn't appear that player is there. It's an offense that loses their top players in the running game. Their passing game was bad. Less than 1,600 yards passing. At almost as many picks as touchdowns there with Andrew Peasley. Not strong in the running game, as I've already mentioned. They lose 3 out of their top 5 receivers. it's going to be a defensive team. Defenses win championships, but you have to have offense to go with that. You can't win just on defense. I think they're going to eke out a lot of wins that they probably shouldn't because of that defense, but I'm not sure how much strength or help this offense gives. I mean, you're probably going to have some games where the offense doesn't score a point, and all the points are scored on, pick sixes or field goals by pick sixes by the defense or field goals by the special teams. So looking at this non-conference schedule, Texas Tech lost to open the season. Portland State should be able to be a win. Texas is going to be a loss. Appalachian State, tough team from the Sun Belt, that will be a loss. They then play New Mexico, which they should be able to win, but again, surprising Mexico team, we'll see. Fresno State loss, Air Force loss, Boise State loss. Now, here we get into the part of the schedule that is winnable. Colorado State, UNLV, Hawaii, Nevada. Right now, I have Wyoming going 2 out of 4 in those matchups. Losses versus Colorado State and UNLV, wins versus Hawaii and Nevada. However, I absolutely, if the offense can get something in gear, if the defense is as strong as we think they are, and the offense can do something, I think that we could see them going 4-0 to finish the season out and getting to 6-6, or maybe 7-5. They're not going to compete for Mountain West Championship game, but they could get to bowl eligibility. I'm calling 4-8 right now, but they could put themselves in a spot to get to bowl eligibility if they can get something going with the offense. So right now, 4-8, but they could potentially look at 6-6. So where does that put our teams? Top to bottom. You got Boise State, 10-2, sitting at 7-1. Second overall, Fresno State, 9-3, 6-2. And again, remember, pod system, no more divisions. So it's the top 2 teams based on record overall. It's very confusing what the tiebreakers are, because if you go to the Mountain West website, at least right now as of today, on the Mountain West website, their tiebreakers are still for the old divisional format, which again is based on playing each other within your division. I'm not sure if it translates perfectly over to the pod system, so I'm not exactly sure how the tiebreakers work. But based on what I predicted so far, it should be Boise State number 1, 10-2, 7-1 in conference. Fresno State number 2, 9-3, 6-2 in conference. Air Force 9-3, also 6-2 in conference. San Jose State 8-4, also 6-2 in conference, and Utah State 7-5, 6-2 in conference. Based on the tiebreakers and head-to-heads, it should be Boise State and Fresno State in the Mountain West Championship game out of those 5. Then you got UNLV 7-5, or probably like I said 6-6, sitting at 5-3 in conference. Colorado State 6-6, 4-4 in conference. San Diego State 4-8, 3-5 in conference. Wyoming 4-8, 3-5 in conference. Nevada 3-9, 2-6 in conference. New Mexico 4-8, 1-7 in conference. And then at the very bottom, Hawaii 2-11, 0-8 in conference. Those top 5 teams: Boise State, Air Force, Boise State, Fresno State, Air Force, San State, Utah State. Maybe top 4, but Utah State could be in competition here. Those 5 teams, any one of them, I could see ending up in the Mountain West Championship game, depending on how things roll and how things develop, and especially with Fresno State, with how the transfer works out, Mike Keeney. Air Force, how things work with this offense. If you're able to rebuild, if the option offense is just impenetrable and is able to work without having top players anyway. If Air Force's option is able to continue to succeed, if San Jose State is able to find some success in the passing game with the loss of top receivers and rebuild on defense, and if Utah State is able to put some things together with so many lost players on defense and issues with the losses in the running game, is able to put some consistency together, any one of those 5 programs, I think Boise State is the strongest based on what they're returning, but any one of those 5 programs could be in. I think Boise State is almost definitely in the Mountain West Championship game. But Fresno State, Air Force, San Jose State, or Utah State, you could see any one of those 4 paired up with the Broncos in the Mountain West Championship game. I'm calling Fresno State right now. If it is Boise State versus Fresno State, I think Boise State wins that game. Boise State, much stronger program. Fresno State, much weaker than they were last year. They're getting to the Mountain West Championship game, but they're not getting there in style. And Boise State is going to be a much stronger team at the end of the year after this defense has time to rebuild from the beginning of the season. Boise State probably also will have more to play for. Boise State is looking at potentially, at least with the record projection I've given them, potentially being in the running for a New Year's Six bowl game. Fresno State probably won't be. So Boise State will have more to play for, and which will put more emphasis on them. And they're probably going to be higher ranked. And based on what I'm saying right now, overall conference record should have the game at Boise. All of those factors, while none of them have protected Boise State in the past for sure, all those factors should help Boise State be able to get that Mountain West Championship win. Of course, also in Garoppolo's third year. He feels the pressure. He wants to get that win for the program. I think that he can do it. And I think that that will be his focus, will be to go get that Mountain West Championship game. And I think you'll see Boise State's best foot forward for that conference game. So Boise State versus Fresno State. Boise State win the conference, but you're going to have some dark horses here. Wyoming, New Mexico, both of these programs, probably not dark horses to make it the conference championship, but both those programs, dark horses, to be much better than what I projected them to be. Bowl eligible possible teams there. And then Fresno State, Air Force, San Jose State, Utah State, all those teams could compete to be in and potentially win the Mountain West Championship game. So thanks everybody for sticking around. Had a ton of fun previewing these teams. The schedule, the actual season is starting here in, like I said, under 10 days, probably under a week for most of you watching this video. So let's watch some real football. Projections out to the wind. Time to actually see what Mountain West puts on the field. Regardless, I'm hoping that it's a great year for the conference overall, and it's a great year for the Bronco Blamehard channel. So make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you put your record predictions in the comments, like I said. And as always, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end, and go!